As it's 7:30, we'll start, and if Councillor Fuller manages to join us, so much the better. Right, well, welcome to the first 7:30 meeting of the Planning Committee for some considerable time. Which is great, because hopefully we'll get home even earlier than normal. So, item 1 on the agenda, to elect a chair of the Planning Committee. Do we have any nominations?
I would like to nominate Councillor David Chapman.
I will second that.
Do I have any other nominations? Is that... Are you voting?
No, he's about to vote.
I'm just waiting.
You don't appear to have any other nominations, do I? All right, all those in favour, please indicate. Right, that would appear to be unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great job there.
There we go again. To elect a deputy chair of the Planning Committee, one of the bases that you try to keep a good thing going, proposed Councillor Neville Oakes. Anybody want to second that?
That.
Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. Any other nominations? No. All those in favour, please indicate. Same again. Right. Well, that's items 1 and 2 done. Item 3 was the terms of reference. Councillors may recall that we spent a little time at the last full council meeting ploughing our way through things like terms of reference, and then got a bit strung up on the idea that they said that we were to comprise no less than 7 councillors because we were struggling to get to 7, but we are at 7, albeit there's only 5 of us here. These were, I can't remember when they were last reviewed, not that long ago, and I would have thought that in terms of our objectives, they probably still hold true. Does anybody have any comments, suggestions?
I think there is.
No?
I think
we did actually look at them last year, I seem to remember. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
And we did make adjustments to them then. So I think they probably...
Fine, well, I'll just say that we accept those. I don't know whether we need a proposal. It sounds as if that's all agreed. To receive and accept apologies for absence. We haven't actually technically had any,
No.
although we're pretty sure that Councillor Glenn is in fact not in Oundle at all. But I suppose we can't actually accept them if they haven't formally been given. So we'll move on to representations from interested parties, except there don't appear to be any. So move swiftly on to declarations of interest, to start with any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests.
I'm a friend of Barnwell Park.
Right.
It's one of the...
Yes, I think we're being consulted on it because it's so close and significant. Yeah, right, well, we know that.
In the facts.
You are too.
Yeah.
So
Right, well,
I think it's only right that we should take that.
3 N and S Oaks and EH, which is item 0102. Right, duly noted. The minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of May have been circulated. Those present were myself, both Councillor Oakes, Councillor Humphreys, Councillor Chesser, who has left us, and Councillor Robinson, who has also left us. So,
I'm happy to propose them.
seconded. All those in favour? Unanimous. I am actually looking for something, so there's a logic to this. Councillors will recall that one of the planning applications that we looked at was that for a change of use of the Angel Inn,
Yeah.
to which we objected. What you may not be aware of is that within the last couple of days, we've been contacted by the applicant because ENC had told the applicant that as Oundle Town Council owns the car park and access to their development site would be via the car park, that they had to give us formal notice to enable us to make representations as the owner of the car park. We had, of course, already dealt with the application and indeed made certain points about it. As it's not specifically on the agenda, and as I'm assured by the clerk that it would not be too late to respond if we put this off to the full council meeting, I'm going to suggest that we actually look at this issue of access across our car park as a separate issue as part of the next full council agenda. So we don't often do a matter arising, but it kind of was.
No question.
So, I forgot whether I actually asked if anybody had proposed the minutes, I think. Did you
Yeah,
actually
Ned
propose
and
them?
Sue,
Oh,
yeah.
and Sue, you did. Have we actually done it?
Mhm.
Oh, right. I think I got a bit thrown by my observation. Right. In
I
that
think it's one
case.
of those general things that really should be looked at by full council, sort of.
Well, that was my initial instinct. Then the mayor got a little worried about leaving it that long. So I said, well, we could perhaps talk about it tonight. Then the clerk took the view that perhaps as it wasn't on the agenda, it wasn't appropriate for us to discuss it tonight, and assured me that it would be in good time if we did it at full council. So full council it will be. It's only a fortnight away, exactly. And we have 21 days within which to respond, and we will be within the 21 days as at that meeting. So it will be straightforward enough. Joy Store. Right. First planning application would appear to be Prince William School and a tree.
Yeah, it's the only tree one. Unusual. Nothing much to say about it, really.
Would appear to be tree husbandry.
There we go. It's lopping, really. That's its position, as you can see, related to Prince William School, and that's what's proposed, and it's husbandry, really, and you can understand the problems with pigeons and stuff,
Yeah.
because we've had that before in other places.
Well, our standard response, where it's simply tree husbandry, is not to object, so I would say no objection. Which brings us on to Barnwell Country Park and the construction of a secure compound, outdoor storage area and installation of 3 additional steel containers to form stores and workshop. Now, it's technically not in the parish, but because it's often known as the Oundle.
That's why I put the exclamation mark after Oundle.
Yes, as it is often known as our country park, and as it is so neighbouring, I'm sure that's why it's come before us.
Yeah.
Does it actually, do they have a look at it as well?
Yes,
Well, Barnwell.
Barnwell.
Yes,
Yes,
Barnwell
I'll
will
come
certainly
to
have a
that.
look at it too.
they have made an observation.
Right.
Okay. Now, I think we all know where Barnwell Park is, and you can see the compound area, which has got that sort of square around it. The reason I'll start with this, are we okay with that? We know where it is, and
Yeah.
that's what's being proposed rather than deep on. This is the reason for the withdrawal of the original application. There was no flood risk assessment, and it's in zone 3 of a risk issue. And there were police concerns about security, and under that it was things like shrouded locks to prevent bolt cutters, and a revised design to eliminate the potential. You can read it. But basically what the police were saying is, we don't want people coming and being able easily to access the compound for the purposes of naughtiness. Now, Barnwell Council had concerns about visibility and recommended that they containers would be painted dark green to blend in. That's where their observation came. My observation is it's around what trees vegetation, so it's unlikely to stand out. The revised application has taken all these factors into account and a flood risk assessment has been provided. I don't know what else I can say about it really. There's not much point going into much more detail.
No, I mean, I can see where Barnwell Parish Council are coming from, in as much as if it can be vaguely camouflaged, it's probably better.
It's pretty thick
Yes.
vegetation around there.
But there again, perhaps if it was dark green, it wouldn't show through that cover, whereas perhaps if it was sky blue plink, it might be something different.
I don't think it was.
I doubt it would be actually there.
But that was really that's the only observation that Barnwell Council effectively
Well, I think
came up with.
my view is that we should take exactly the same line
Same
on
approach.
that. I mean, I think it's all about visibility because it is now and will be for some time
Absolutely.
a major access into Andon along that road past that compound
Yep.
True.
till the bridge is done. So we should make it as, or recommend that it becomes as unobtrusive as
Should we put it
possible.
in camouflage?
Well, they could go, but they're very good at Barnwell. I mean, the guys,
Oh,
the
they're
people
very-
there, they
they're-
want it to be right. So we're not sort of fighting anything here.
No.
I think we should perhaps just
I-
put it as a recommendation.
I'm sure that it would be taken on board. Do you have any? No. In that case, we'll make that point, but otherwise no objection.
Yeah, I think we should just agree with Barnwell's
Yeah.
observation.
Which takes us on to Limehouse, 4 East Road.
I'm going to make this as simple as possible because this is an extremely complicated business. But I've boiled it down. Right. If you don't know where this is, it's really effectively opposite our car park. And it consists of 3 dwellings. Limehouse was originally not entirely shared. It was more as an entertainment area, and the others were probably used by servants and the people who owned the places to live there. Now, the lady who's put the application in, we've already dealt with several applications on this site, and what has happened is that she now effectively owns number 6, Limehouse, and number 4, and the idea is to turn it into a single house. So, these are my observations. The 3 houses have very independent histories. If you wanted to go in and look at the planning application, it's a fascinating, very lengthy load of, the windows removed and when they were bricked up and all sorts of stuff at all various different times. And it's a higgledy-piggledy historic thing. Now, the applicant has sought to bring them together as a single house, and that means maybe, putting some doors in to make access from one to the other. There's clear evidence within the application of a wish to reserve the heritages of the houses. And there's a gentleman called Ian Solden, who's a very well-known historian. He's published books on the subject, has been consulted. One of the interesting things about that, Councillor Chappell, is that he read a very interesting thing about St Faith's Main in Norwich between AD 600.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting book, which I've ordered. I was hoping to bring it in today, so I think sort of wave it in front of you. But he's a serious historian, and there have been several other people who are experts in this. This has been incredibly well researched, which is why I'm keeping it very, very simple, otherwise it would be all night. Right, okay. That's my observation.
Yes. Undoubtedly it is. And I think it could well be tricky because once you actually try and merge 2 important buildings into 1 important building, there is a risk that something's lost almost inevitably in that. however sympathetically you try to do it. But I don't think, personally, I'm equipped to judge whether or not this would adversely impact the integrity of, if you like, the two buildings. Three buildings.
That's what Neville said.
Yeah.
He's doing it, yeah.
So,
Lloyd Milton's, on this one.
this may be one where we find it quite difficult to actually comment specifically.
Well, my only comment would be, as always, is if you make a large house, there's that many more people, and then we fall back into the parking issue. More people mean more cars. It's already congested down there. Whether they need, whether that needs to even be discussed, I don't know. But
Well, she's actually had these through dwellings for quite a while now. I don't think there's been any parking issue that I would have made aware of. It's just that what she's doing is sort of bringing it into, trying to turn it into a single unit. Clearly an awful lot of money's been thrown at this.
Evidently.
Although that may not be necessarily the reason for rejecting.
No.
Or you would agree? I can't see that.
it's just an observation. It's not an objection. It's just an observation.
Yeah.
Well, I see no reason not to flag it up, because we would normally have that at the forefront of our minds. But in terms of what is proposed, I don't think we have an objection, because I don't hear any objections. But I think what we do have is a concern that we will want to be satisfied that the conservation officer is happy with what is proposed, and ultimately that's the point that you make. So I think if we can put some wording to that effect.
I mean, what's proposed is I would feel is really is sympathetic, and in fact a lot of it is rolling back the years instead of trying to gloss something up and turn it into a 20th century mansion. They want to preserve the features, or she does. I don't know what else to say really.
No, well, I think...
I have to say, we'd have to march through a ton of paper. I'd march through a ton of paper.
All right, well, I think we'll simply indicate that we've no objections, subject to any contrary view of the conservation officer with regard to whether it affects the integrity of the buildings, given their listed status, and subject to being satisfied that there would be adequate parking for the building that then results.
Yeah.
Which probably takes us on to something slightly less difficult to think about, which is the erection of a fermentation vessel outside the Nen Valley Brewery at Anvil Wharf.
Well, I've seen the old one pint of beer occasionally, so I expect you know where the Nen Valley Brewery is. There we go. The site and position. This is where they intend to put this fermentation tank. Now, the interesting thing is I've spoken to Dick Simpson, who's the joint owner of this site, and he actually says that probably we wouldn't have needed to apply for planning permission, because it's a demandable vessel, but they decided to put it in. I've amalgamated the two of the FUL and the APP, because I didn't see any point in separating them, and you can see what they've basically put on the fermentation tank. Site floor plan shows you where the new tank is. You can see the brewery shops to the left, so it's sort of hidden behind the brewery shop from the point of view of the main entrance into the town. It's all around the back. I've taken some. I'll just do this. I'll into the third half of it. That's the brewery shop, and that's where they're going to stick the tank site. That's the tank site.
It might hang some of those barrels, I don't know.
Well, when you look at it, it couldn't really make it look any worse, could it? I mean, funnily enough, I was down there the other day and looking at it and thinking, it's a shame they haven't got some sort of a store
Yeah.
which would keep all of those things out of sight.
Yes, we put an objection.
Um,
But really, I'm poor.
It has got more and more busy
oh, it has.
because again, I know that they're supplying now places in Cambridge, all over. Not down to London, but locally.
I certainly went out for a meal somewhere in Bedfordshire
Yeah, well,
and was
there you
pleased to see that actually they were serving beer from our very own brewery.
They supply an awful lot of those.
Anna and James live in Cambridge, my daughter and they've been to just one. He said, oh, we've got 6 or 7 places in Cambridge now.
It's called the Pint Shop, isn't it?
So he needs all those barrels of beer, doesn't he?
Well, it won't be, I can't imagine it will be long before they increase the whole building.
No.
Want to do that.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. But the thing is that because I went back and I did the original application for this, I mean, when you think what was there before, I mean, the only main objection you had was the sign that
The big one on the roadside.
Big road sign on
Yeah.
the bridge. Nobody else complained about anything.
No.
And then he's done such a fantastic job, and I mean, he's opened up the wharf, and going there is an absolute joy, especially in the sunshine.
Right, well,
I've no objection.
we've talked a lot about the merits of the brewery business, but perhaps not so much about the application itself.
Well, it's not small beer, David.
Yeah. Right. Well,
No
I mean, it will be
objection.
relatively unobtrusive given what's already there anyway, so unless anybody has any clear
No
reason
objection.
to say something different, I would say no objection to that one.
No.
Which takes us on to the advertisement bit.
Well, that's really part of it. I mean, it's on there, look. That's why, I merged them. I'll just get back. You can see it, look.
Is it MVB?
On the tank itself.
Yeah, MVB.
It's just,
Well, given that it's
it's not
non-illuminated,
illuminated.
yes, I mean, had it
On the
been
tank.
a neon sign, I think we might have possibly had a little bit more of an issue about it, but
It's more or less hidden from sight, so unless you come in through that,
yes.
you wouldn't see it.
But I mean, as you go into the car park, you'd see it, and perhaps as you come round the corner, I don't know.
I noticed they conveniently didn't put any tanks or cars.
But it's already got a massive Great Oundle brewery on the building
It does.
itself
It has,
anyway,
isn't it?
hasn't it? So it's, you know, it's not
Again,
gonna
it's-
make much difference.
That's one of the reasons why I put the photograph.
It's almost de minimis, isn't it?
I mean,
You know,
that's...
it's not going to change that many, is it?
Not really. There's,
In fact,
there's all
the
mixed
sign
colours.
on the tank will be no bigger than the red sign under the first and the
Yeah, the
blue
old sign or whatever.
Yep. Really,
No objection?
No objection.
No objection. Right,
this is quite interesting.
20 Herne Road.
Okay. Now, we've looked at this before, actually, and as you can see from the red thing here, we had a look at it. They withdrew it, and we made observations, which are still effectively on record, about doesn't dominate the streets, etc. That's the existing location, and I just did that because you can just see it's more or less opposite Prince William School. Well, you can't read it there, but that's what it is. And basically, the proposed site is slightly enlarged from the existing footprint of the bungalow. So look at the photos. Now that is the bungalow. Right. So, you know, fairly sort of insignificant. I put that up, and it's from the design and access statement, because it shows the houses, or this house on the right as you see it. You know, it's a substantial dwelling, and in fact the one on the left is pretty substantial as well. So it's sort of like illuminating sitting in between two very large wings. This is an extract from the design and access statement. By the way, I've slightly edited this because look at that. But basically it's saying, you know, there's a lot of different buildings down Herne Road, which is absolutely true. We don't have any parking difficulties. But what they intend to do is to turn it into a two-storey house instead of a bungalow, a shy bungalow. Right. Plans and elevations haven't seen it, because we've looked at this before. That's what you're looking at, really. You can see the existing ones have got a sort of a tiny first floor. They are proposing to increase the footprint a fair bit, but the street scene, I'll come to that in a sec. If you can get the general idea, the general feel of it, effectively it's going to build above. And, oh, where are we? Oh no, I thought I got it. Where are we? I don't know what else to say. We've looked at it before, we had an objection,
Well,
but I'll
The only reason it's come back, as I understand it, is because almost of the way they categorised it.
yeah.
Because they categorised it as extending the property, and ENC probably quite rightly said, frankly, you're not extending a property, you're building a brand new property on the site of an existing one.
Yeah.
And so they brought it back. But the comments that we made last time apply equally this time.
Yeah.
And unless anybody's come up with any additional points, it seems to me we simply repeat verbatim what we said last time.
I think it would, in a way, it would actually, in a way, I think it would actually enhance the street scene.
It might well. I think we've all have in mind a particular property in Clapthorne Road that its visual impact turned out to be rather greater as a built structure than it appeared as a
We
plan.
we really didn't see that one
Well,
coming.
we didn't see it coming, and that's why I think maybe we've got a little sensitive now to trying to ensure that we don't have a similar scenario.
Shall we just repeat our objection?
I would say literally repeat it
I think
word
we need
for
to do
word.
that because it's in a different application.
Yeah, oh no, we can't not comment, we just repeat the previous comments. So I shall simply write the words as before on my note. Which takes us on to the North Bridge.
I'm also trying to keep this nice and simple.
Well, since it's probably an engineering solution about which none of us are particularly capable of
Right.
commenting.
I've gone through this. There are an engineering stuff in it, an awful lot of photographs. Now, I'll just put this in just in case you want to know what a cut water is, a spandrel wall, and they misspelled Vissoir. So I figured it. Chuffed about that. But basically, look, that's just the architecture of a bridge, really. You've got arches and you've got bits that it sits on and whatever. Well, I just thought I'd put that in just in case people were wondering what those things were. Yes, I'm going to go into the French possibility of this one. Anyway, there's an enormous amount of interesting history, like the one we looked at Lyme Paris. And I like just reading simple things like there was an earlier medieval bridge and it got destroyed in 1570, so it gives you an idea of the age of this thing. It was rebuilt in 1571, but it's been altered a fair bit. It's been widened and one or two other things have happened. Now what I put is much technical detail and photographs, this is my observation. I don't think it's really suitable for us to comment upon it because it is very, very technical.
No, my
If
feeling
anybody,
too.
if anybody is really...
Well, we can hardly refuse this application.
Well, but hang on a minute. because-
Lloyd Mills is the case officer for it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
yes.
Lloyd is on the case.
So I think it's in the best possible hands.
But the thing I think we might be interested in, this is an extract and an entry comment, but that's me doing it. The concealed repairs,
I leave the bridge.
virtually unchanged, with its structural integrity restored.
Yeah.
And this is good news. And this is another interesting one.
That is interesting. Jude's
It is,
point,
isn't it?
we will try to keep car traffic flowing.
Yeah.
I thought that was the whole point of the bollard and everything else. To keep it flowing.
I actually think the purpose of the bollards was to stop anything heavy going over the bridge and wrecking it further.
Does that hint at the fact that they might at one time shut it?
Well, they will have to shut it at some point, apparently, in order to put in some preparatory work.
Well, we've already had that comment, haven't we, from a resident saying, why is it taking this long for the planning to come through?
I just thought I'd like to say that Northamptonshire Highway via KWSP have made that statement.
Well, we
I mean,
clearly
I-
cannot
I-
comment
we
upon...
must keep traffic flow
Yes.
together.
We can't comment upon the technical aspects of this other than to say that we obviously are concerned that as little sort of damage is done to the important historic structure as possible, and therefore we defer to the conservation officer to liaise with them over the best way of ensuring this. And if we want to add in a comment that we hope that indeed it will be possible to ensure that car traffic can continue to use the bridge during the course of the repair works. That way,
Only put up what they-
exactly, but that way, when parishioners get cross, we can always say, look, when we responded, we said.
Yeah, no,
And I actually think it's worth doing
that's
for that
probably
reason.
What I'm intimating, and thank you, Chair, for doing that. So in your usual concise manner, we'd be laughing stock, wouldn't we, if we'd gone through all of this battle to do this, and then they shut it through a little clause that they had in their wording somewhere.
Yeah, but
we might as well have not bothered.
It was said, early on, I remember that they said they would have to probably shut it for a period while they did some work. But I don't know whether they'd actually found a way around that. What I can say is that is what is said in the...
Well, I think the chair has already made one point on that and go in there.
Right. I think we've probably covered that one. Which takes us on to 60A East Road, which is interesting. Demolition of bungalow, erection of replacement dwelling house, construction of 4 new build dwelling houses.
Right. Some implications for us, I think, but let's have a look at it first. That's the existing thing. Now, as you can see, it's just north of the James Strong Centre. Up the top is Maxton Junior School, and the development is in between the two. Now, that's the existing site. Now, there is the gazebo, which that arrow is pointing to, and it's within the garden of the Barrister, which is Grade 1 listed. It's one of our 4 Grade 1 listed buildings in Oval. The garden structures are Grade 2. Well, the ones that are listed as Grade 2, they're individual ones. I don't think they don't really impact upon this. But that was the site of the satellite. And as you can see, more or less, it's just difficult to get these things on a PowerPoint slide, but it's absolutely covered in trees and vegetation and stuff. I'll come to this. This is the photo from the existing application. That's the one that's actually on the ENC website, okay, which is obviously they've put in. The wall is of no historic importance according to the observation within the design and access statement. Now I've taken a look at this. Now basically it's basically pretty rough, bubbly type thing, and it certainly has no real aesthetic or historical interest, which means that they take the whole thing down if they want to. It's not in the conservation area and it's not listed, so that's something else to consider. This is the gazebo, which is opposite the site. That's almost directly from where this would be built. But there's observations within the thing about making it sympathetic, etc., etc. Now, these are my photographs, which I taken literally, I think, yesterday. Okay, so.
This happened.
They haven't actually got the bungalow yet. That photograph is taken in between the bungalow and the garage, you can see on the left-hand side. But clearly, there's been an awful lot of work.
That's been quite a while as well. They started it quite a while ago.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, obviously, they think they might have, well, I don't know if they've jumped the gun or not. But we don't like this sort of thing, really. You won't have a planning application and then sort of say yes and that sort of thing. But anyway, this is a site plan from the application. Now, I it's all at the moment, you'll see a bigger one. But basically, you can see, this is going to be the street scene. And this is the north side that looks towards the Lapston School. You can see the bungalow replacement on the right, and that's next to the East Road. Right? So it goes into the East Road. What I've done now is I've inverted it to make it look a little bit more sane and sensible. So you can see now, on the left-hand side is East Road. You've got the James Strong Centre. In between the James Strong Centre and the site, there's actually a track that goes back some time, and I think it used to be used for Oval School to be able to get vehicles down to their a shed where they used to keep bits and pieces. It looks, I think it's still being used, but it's a bit restricted. Yeah. Well, one of the issues that they put in their thing is about noise and things like that in passing and repassing. There's a gate that stops people going down there, isn't there? Yeah. Well, what you've got, you see, it really is that the bungalow replacement is going to be a substantial dwelling. As you can see, you've got 2 garage spaces and 2 potential car park spaces, and they will be accessed directly from the road. You've then got that's the reason I put it this way round, is you've then got a road that goes to on the north of the site, which, you know, that's where you would see the frontage that's been shown. And you've got 3 effectively new style houses, 1 substantial building at the front, then you've got a pretty substantial building at the back. There doesn't appear to be any car parking issues with this one, although some people do have 4 cars these days. But I've got the general feeling about it. If you want to have a look at it. Have you got it? I mean, there are several things about this really, aren't there? I mean, the principle of it, you know, do we think the design is appropriate? Is it a bit of a squeeze? The bungalow's been vacant and has been pretty well derelict for quite some time. The building just above the road, the new road they've got, is occupied by own teachers, I believe. I don't know what else I can say. The reason that they put on the 2 rumble strips that you can see to slow the cars down was of interest to the highways people, because it did mean that the average sort of speed that goes across there is probably 20 miles an hour or less. So there's discussion in the application about visibility display, but because the wall is of no interest, that matter has largely been resolved. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions about it. I mean, you could go on for ages about this.
Well, the only observation...
Can I just, before we actually start, bearing in mind its proximity to the Jones Strong, which is a building owned by this council,
yes,
I suspect that we should all declare an other interest, because it has no pecuniary benefit to any of us individually, but clearly given that this is the nearest structure, more or less, to the development site, I think it's probably appropriate that we at least note that. I don't think it should in any way constrain us. I actually think it's unlikely that its effect, if any, on the Jones Strong is the issue, if any, that we'll have with it. But I think it probably should be noted.
I'm quite happy to declare an interest. I think it's a bit spurious, but
Yeah, I just want to dot the I's and cross the T's, I think, a little bit. So,
Well, my only observation will be traffic, of course.
I was going to say that.
There are potentially, there's 2 cars, there's 10 cars minimum moving in and out of an already congested area in the mornings. There is a zebra crossing there because the school kids go across it
There is.
to go to and from Laxton Junior to eat, sometimes in the refectory, which is on the other side of the road, by the next door to the gazebo. And it's already busy. And there are all speed humps there on that road, aren't there?
We were there when the children were crossing, and I was driving the car, and I had to really watch the traffic that was coming and the people that were about.
And that road, that end of the road is already single lane
Yes.
because of parking there, with the houses that already exist there. I mean, and my other observation will be, or something we consider, is there are lots of mature trees on that site. Should we sort of throw in a comment on protection of existing?
There is an overall.
yeah.
On the
Well, I
existing
think
sort of-
any comment could include one that we would want the tree officer to visit the site and check that no trees of significance would be lost as a result of
So it does
what is
screen
proposed.
some of the area from the school, from the Animal School wharf, not wharf, as it used to be, the Clerk Works building, which is down there next to it.
Well, I really put this up again because when we were there, you had a whole load of school children coming out of that gate on the right-hand side. And I had to wait until they got because I didn't want anybody to think I was taking photographs of their children.
I mean, they have provided parking, and that's fine, but it's at the
Yeah.
morning and evening rush hour that you get, and that you throw another. Well, we can't stop this thing. It's happening. I mean, it's impossible to stop it. I think it's just an observation. Another 10 cars in the mix.
Well,
The visibility on the coming into it.
I'm assuming, because you haven't mentioned it, that there is no observation from the school
No.
as yet.
No.
Because I'd be a little surprised if there ultimately isn't.
I think they're moderately in favour of it because it improves the street scene. Because what's there at the moment is what I've shown you. But I mean, I can't quote it on that because the trouble with these comment things is they always come in after I've done my presentation. But I mean, you can see pretty well where I think entirely accept.
Well, just out of curiosity, on the side to that, what's actually happening with the long stay car park on the Jones Strong?
Oh, I was going to put a thing up about that, but it's not on the agenda. But you can start counting the number of car parking spaces that we're potentially going to lose within a decade. It's a bit frightening, really.
Well, if we're going to lose that site, and
Well,
this is just a comment, if we're going to lose that site will turn into another, 20, 30 houses?
Could be.
Well, I think we have to be clear that there might be an argument for saying that it's an asset of community value, and there may be arguments which may enable us to retain a car park on that site. I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that it would be lost at the end of the current lease period. And I don't think we can particularly factor that into the consideration of this site. But as an observation
on that.
Clearly, if there were residential development in that area, it would have a not inconsiderable impact. I'm like Councillor Humphreys. I actually do worry a little bit about that number of additional movements at that location on a road which is already at times extremely difficult for both the pedestrians who have to use it and other road users.
Well, there's an awful lot of parents who deliver their children to school.
Clearly, as a site, it could take that number, but in fact, if the number were reduced, then that impact would be lessened. And I think that I would like to see less new build on there to reduce the number of cars. I'm not hugely worried about the style of the buildings or anything else. I think given where it is, it's not going to have any particularly adverse impact from a street
It's
scene
only
point
about
of
the
view.
cars, and in fact you could argue, I think fairly convincingly, that if you reduce the dwellings to 3 or 2 dwellings, those people could have 5 cars each, and so the vehicle traffic would, that's a sort of moot point. As I say, it's not. They're not really objections that I don't have particularly, and they are observations, and I hope someone listens to these sorts of observations about the traffic and the school and the school kids, and the impact it does have, and the visual scene, I think, because I think, unbeknownst to us all, I think we walk around and we are surrounded by lots and lots of mature trees in this town, and I think if we started to lose more of them, I think we'd probably notice it. It would begin to become. So I think having the tree officer there and a sort of like comment on the traffic. I don't know how we can stop that, Chair. I really don't know how we. You can't really say to people you can only have 2 cars. Or
I don't think you can say you can only have 2 cars, but being realistic, there are, although you do get the odd family that will have quite a number of cars, often if they do, they're not all moving about at quite the same time, and some of them are used little. But for myself, I would prefer to see fewer properties on there, but I don't know whether my view is shared. I mean, obviously Councillor Humphreys has a concern that's generated by that number of properties.
It would be my preference. I mean, you'll remember, anyway, talking about the car park there, the Longstay car park, the pistol that was held to our head when we had that emergency meeting in St Peter's Church. And virtually had a gun held to our head to say, and we didn't know who the purchaser was, and we don't know what the purchaser's intentions are to do with the said land.
But given what the purchaser was, they obviously regard it as an investment.
Quite.
And it's not the rent that we are paying during this 15-year lease that is the investment
Quite.
angle of it.
That was my point of view.
So, yeah.
Inherently, I have no objection to it as a concept, but I would like to think that we might be able to say...
If we were to say, then, something along these lines, that we have no objection to the replacement of the bungalow, we have no objection in principle to residential development taking place on the site, but we do have a concern about the potential impact on traffic and on the school children that may be generated from the site, which might indicate that fewer rather than more dwellings would be appropriate. And we would also want the tree officer to visit the site in case...
If there's any trees left.
Yeah,
well, I mean, at the moment, it would
rather than
appear that there aren't going to be very much left in the way of the trees that are on that site. Now, he may say that there is nothing on there that is important, but if he were to say that there were some important trees that perhaps should be protected, then we would want them to redesign their plan around the retention of the trees.
I think the other thing,
You can see the trees that they regard as being valuable in the left-hand picture.
Yeah.
well, there would have been a tree survey done on the original plan, like that site, presumably.
Sorry, say
There
that
would have
again.
been a tree survey done
Yes.
That was already done, and those are the ones they've marked on there. But I, you know, sort of,
It's as
part
good
of
as
me,
the
part of me wants the small trees to become big trees, because I think they're not as well. Yeah. Anyway,
Well, there's an observation about the thicket, which is thriving, but that needs tidying up. And that's the thicket that runs on the south side, in between the site and the Jones Strong Centre. And that's that track that we were talking about, which...
and another observation of mine would be, we in the past, i.e. from when the school started the sports centre and things, on a site of this size with that number of dwellings on it, should we concern ourselves with site traffic?
Construction traffic.
Construction traffic and white van man arriving.
I think there is a point.
trades, you know.
Actually, I think it's a well-made point, because of course
really?
you've got a construction site at the school, and you do not necessarily want trucks coming when the children themselves are either arriving or leaving. And so perhaps conditions that ensure that these things do not coincide would make a degree of sense. I appreciate that will actually make it a little bit more difficult to develop because
That's tough.
of the times. But I think it's actually an important thing, which
I mean, I
grateful
think
to
all
the
the
council for
trade
raising.
vans, in fact, of course, will all park in the Jones Strong car park as well,
Possibly,
as they do tend to in the Curve car park when any construction is around there. So I'm just sort of, I'm not objecting to it, but I just think, you're going to lose,
It's going to cause...
you're going to lose 10, 12 parking spaces in the Jones Strong every day, with the white van man trade vehicles and everyone else being on site. I don't know, they're little observations that you think,
when we went along to see look at this, because I know about this track, because it used to be able to get access into it one time, but you can't do that now. So we went to the John Strong Centre, and pretty well every one of those car parking spaces was full.
Right down to the bottom.
Right down to the bottom.
It's normally where factory workers. That's
Yeah, it's fair.
It's fair.
Yes.
well, that's just going to make it worse then, isn't it? You know, so
Well,
I don't know. I don't
I
know
think
about
that's-
the observations.
I mean, it is going to be
But I think that's a very
probably
good
not
point to
capable
make,
of being
because-
controlled. I think it would be difficult to put a condition in that says they can't park
no,
vehicles
but I mean,
associated with the construction on that side.
Am I being a bit, pernickety in thinking about site traffic, or is it something we should, on sites of this size, be conscious of and make a...
No, we should, because we've had this before, and basically tradespeople have flouted it. And there should be, I can't remember exactly what they call it now, but there should be, they have construction restrictions and all sorts of things. You can't start work, until 8 o'clock in the morning. We had this all up at Green Groves, in quite a considerable amount of detail, but they just flouted it.
Yes, but that's not a reason for not trying.
No, agreed.
And that one, actually, in that particular location, is going to be less relevant because it's not going to be the impact actually on residences. The impact is on the flow of traffic and on the school children.
I mean, I think
during term
that's
time.
ultimately my
So I think
concern, so.
saying that again, if permission is granted for the residential redevelopment of the site, then conditions should be imposed along the lines that I outlined earlier.
Yep.
It's going to be quite a lengthy response, that, if you want to run it by me. Any more observations on this? Attempt to write that down. I'll just write no observations, but I think I can hopefully remember it. Which takes us to our old friend 15 Mill Road again.
Again, I try and keep it simple. Right. Well, you've already read it on the agenda. I merely have to say that, we've looked at this on a number of occasions. It's been around for a bit. But basically, the proposed plans and elevations are completely illegible on the ANC website. I rang to say that I can't see these, they're so faint, I can't see them. There's no way I can display them. But I can't see anything becoming, for me, okay, these are my observations from a town council perspective. Basically, it's largely, largely it's because they're now trying to comply with requirements to do with safety, escaping from the building should there be a problem there. And the only thing I could see there is add new door to kitchen as per drawings. But I mean, I've gazed at these drawings and I'm not quite sure where this door is. But I can't believe it's going to mean that we're going to jump up and down about it.
Well, from what I could make of it, I agree. I don't think there's anything in there that's going to exercise us.
I agree.
No objection. Right.
Can I have a small interjection here? Because while we've got the PowerPoint running, I'd be grateful if you'd, while the PowerPoint is up, I'd like to drop down the agenda to the bit about any of the business, effectively. Okay. Like, this is PC 19.17, like any other relevant matters.
Right.
And it's only doing this to jump because this would come up under any other business, and it may seem appropriate to do it now. Now, I think my lady will explain it.
Right, so this is the, and I've spoken to Lisa and Emma and Rebecca yesterday and today, but this is the last new playground at the top of Hillfield Road, which has recently been put in on the Persimmon estate. Okay, and the reason why I just wanted to say something about it is because I've been approached by various residents about this playground. You can see how it looks. I don't know how you think it looks. It's not the best picture, but they think there's a lot of uproar. There's a lot going on Facebook, but the main thing about it is that they are complaining because they think the council should do something about it. And I've spoken to a couple of people and said, this is still, all of this, the grass cutting, everything is Persimmon. Okay, it's nothing to do with Amble Town Council. But there's a lot of upset because that playground as you see it is, remember there was an issue with water at the top of the estate. There's two sunken areas. So to the right there's another sunken area which has got railings around it, and that's just going to fill with water, and the water will, if it needs to, will overflow and come through on the right, that concrete bit there. So the complaints of the upset is around the fact that there's no railings to protect the children or to stop any dogs in there, going into there. And in fact there was a child on the swing with a dog on a lead, and another dog came along and the child let go of the lead and the dogs, there's chaos everywhere. There's no steps, there's no railings, there's just a pathway in, and there's a tiny bin which is permanently overflowing. They've actually, by doing that playground, they've taken away the dog poo bins. There was one there up to the right. Anyway, that's by the by. Those boulders you see are concrete, don't know why they're there. But moving on from that, the play area, this whole bit of the estate, the new bit there, the grass was only cut about 2 weeks ago, and I made a comment to Rebecca who followed it through. And in fact the next day, we just by chance, men from, I think it's TCL came out and they were cutting the grass. And I said, oh, I'm so pleased to see you. He said, do you know, he said, if my boss saw this, he'd be disgusted, he'd be in real trouble. He said, we have been employed by Persimmon. He said, but now look, we'll be coming out every fortnight and we'll be cutting all this grass. We'll also be going into the playgrounds and we'll be emptying the bins. Okay? Because bins are overflowing, dog poo, everything. And I saw him again today, a different man, and he said he'd been up to look at this playground, and his comments were that he doesn't think it's it's obviously got to pass some tests yet, but it won't pass the tests, the appropriate tests for health and safety or whatever. So it's been left that the men from TCL, who feel that this shouldn't be in this sunken area, but whether that can be changed, I don't know, because it's going to be completely flooded in the winter. But they are going back to Persimmon to have a moan and say that there's a lot of uproar and that residents are not happy. So I'm just telling you about it because I've made it clear, I've given them my name as a councillor to take back to Persimmon, but I've made it clear that Arundel Town Council, this isn't our responsibility. And if it is wrong, it needs to be...
Well, I mean, I think this is really interesting. I mean, I think the thing about this is it shows us in the things that we're thinking about in the neighbourhood, if you think in neighbourhood plan developments around the town, but if you leave developers to their own devices, protection of children and children's facilities or public facilities that they put onto these estates and developments is the last thing they think about. And it's crucial that we remind them every time that these houses are full of children and that's where people live. And if they glibly say, well, we will put a child's area in, we will do this, we will do that, give us permission, and they just gloss over it. And that picture is what you end up with.
Yeah.
Something that is a health and safety officer's nightmare.
There's quite a slope, so if a young child lost the footing, they could hit
There's there are all sorts of regulations to protect children on playgrounds, and obviously very few of them have been taken into consideration on that. But I think it's just as a comment, I think when we're talking about things like this, that you cannot trust the developer to do anything other than make money.
It's been left that, I've spoken to Rebecca a couple of times, and it's been left that she is going to send an email to Persimmon, and I said, you can put my name on there, and you can say it's because, they need to know that we are not responsible, you are responsible for maintaining this in a better order.
The management company. There'll be a management company won't be there.
Okay.
Because Persimmon have left site, haven't they?
Yeah, these houses were Charles Church houses. Yeah. And there's another comment was made that the Creed Road residents are paying Charles Church £20 a month maintenance. Hillfield Road aren't paying that yet, the new ones. So they're not going to pay it, because why should they pay when this looks just a disgrace? But that's an issue for them. But it's just, I want to try and move it forward if we can to get it improved and to the right standards, but I don't want the council to be thought of badly as...
No. Well, I'm grateful for you bringing it to our attention. I mean, what does strike me about it is almost certainly there would have been planning conditions imposed with regard to the provision of a suitable play area. And that certainly does not, to me, look like a suitable play area. It looks like a hazard just waiting to happen.
It's like one of those pictures where you pick the worst hazard and put them all together in one place.
It's just dumped it there as if to say, right, I wonder if we put the playground there so now they can charge the Hillfield residents £20.
Well, I think we should actually raise our concerns with ENC.
She might like that.
Thank you.
Well, I think all I'll say, I mean, what was being said before was quite right. Often these things are the last things that go into housing developments, because there's inherently no value to a developer. It's just something they have to do. But this play area was always on the original plans, but it was never indicated it was going to be a sunken garden.
No, that's because
Never indicated it was going to be that. I mean, and they had an awful lot of lorries going up and down, taking soil away from there, I can tell you, because that was level.
Yeah.
And you think, well, why did they take that out? Well, the reason is obviously to do with this attenuation tank, or attenuation system, we better call it, on the right-hand side, which then comes through that sluice. That's the general idea, but it's so crude. It's just appalling.
But the playground people can't understand why the playground is in that dip when it's going to be
Flooded.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, does it?
Let's approach...
That's it.
let us approach ENC and see if there is anything that they could stroke should be doing. I think the approach that we've already adopted, thank you, Councillor, is excellent, because whether ENC do or don't have a go at Persimmon, we certainly should be, because this is not good enough. And you can just see all the problems, the flooding, the fact there are numerous hazards about the way it's done.
Children being injured, we'll get
The idea of not putting railings around it, I mean...
The other thing is, what Councillor said, management companies, they're going to be going and diving if there's anything that happens.
No, I mean, that's obviously, like I say, the player itself and the design of it comes within Persimmon, but the maintenance, when you mentioned the bins are overflowing, and that comes to the maintenance company, and they have terms and conditions that they'll be breaching if they're not.
Okay. Well,
I
the
mean,
So the residents perhaps need to,
The bin is a small, you've never seen a bin so small.
yeah.
It's ludicrous, and no dog bin.
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there a residents' association for that? Is there a community?
Well, I used to-
Has the residents got
The answer
together?
to that is clearly no. I used to have a Creed Road Residents Association when sites were being developed up there. And that was quite some time ago, before these houses were built. I'd be quite happy actually to draw up a little bit of, do a little bit of leafleting, and I'm quite happy to do that. Because, I mean, I don't want the council to be brought into some kind of pseudo disrepute, because people think that, we're responsible for dealing with it. I mean, John Bullard and Nobby, do a fantastic job for us elsewhere, and keep the pay areas neat, clean and tidy and safe.
I remember a conversation I was having with Councillor Susan Oakes not that long ago, when I said that perhaps we should use some of our media outlets to explain the things that we're actually not responsible for. And this would be a good an absolutely typical one to say, you may not be happy with this, but don't blame us, this is not ours, we do not have the control.
Perhaps it should go in the, what's the little
Well, we could put it in the Oracle, stick it in the Avatar, we could do it. I think we ought to do
But
that.
it's moving now.
No, I
because
think if
men
you
have gone
empower
back,
people,
and Rebecca's done whatever she's done, sorry.
if you empower people, say you, as a resident, you have some control over your environment, and almost empower them by giving them sort of a nudge in the right direction. It might be just all it needs for people to actually go back to the management, as you say, the management.
Well, that's what they're being charged, it's £20 a month.
£20 a month.
And that's what it's for, it's to maintain the areas and keep it clean and tidy and landscaping.
Can I just say, the gentleman who came and did the play area and did the mowing was superb.
He was superb, and he's actually going to get a dog bin, and he's going to put a bigger bin in for the litter, for the playground.
So it's not,
And he will report
Not
from
like
that back
that.
to
not
by
that
his
they were really,
bosses.
really
Yeah, no,
Charles Church.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we've given that one
That's it.
we've given that one a fair old.
One of my duties was to keep an eye on the plants and everything, so I've been.
Yes. Right. Well, let's get us back to the agenda, which we can hopefully rattle.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about
Well, I
that.
was going to say rattle through. There's another item that might take a while. The planning outcomes are all shown. Perhaps the only one of any great interest was Cobthorne, where councillors may recall we expressed some concern about the idea of railings. It appears that our concerns were not entirely shared at ENC. There is an item on here to discuss temporary and permanent advertising in Elmville. It's on because I received a letter from Cameron Holmes, who's connected with the football club, who wanted to put some advertising up and seemed to think that they had to ask us for our permission. So I disabused him of that and said, look, if it requires permission, which it may well, then you have to make a formal application to ENC. Which, okay, they may pursue. Doubtless if they do, the specifics will come back to us. If it transpires that in fact they don't need permission for what they were planning to do, then of course it may well be that we ought to be showing a degree of interest in it. But it did kind of open up this whole subject about advertising, because they at least had the courtesy to ask and check. Not everybody does. And there are loads of different forms of advertising that appear either on a permanent stroke semi-permanent basis, or those that are transitory. But transitory can sometimes hang on and on. I had intended tonight to demonstrate my point by bringing a sign that had been left up from the Peterborough Antiques Fair for about a month on the road between Oundle and Glapthorne. But the other day it disappeared. So somebody must have got the idea that I was thinking of pulling it up and bringing it in to illustrate the point, because a month after that event had concluded and the thing was still sitting there on the verge. Councillor Oates.
That's what you did.
Yes.
And,
Do you want me to pass it along to David?
and,
Right.
RNIB,
This was a number of years
can I
ago.
just say, this was a while back, because we had a terrible problem with A-boards. If you recall, I did quite a long presentation, but I rattled off a whole load of photographs of A-boards up and down West Street and all over the place. And a lot of them actually breached reasonable guidelines in terms of how far they got onto the pavement and various other bits and pieces. I actually wrote up, but I can't find it, a suggestion for us to adopt as a kind of a sort of a policy about it. Now, one of them was to say, for example, when the fairground people come, they put their posters up. And the old idea is that when they go, they take them down. And that's a pretty straightforward sort of thing. And that alludes to what you said earlier, Councillor Chapel. But I've done an awful lot of work on this. An awful lot of work on this. And probably a lot of it will come back into my brain. But there are guidelines and best practices. There's a whole raft of it. I also looked at what other councils have done up and down the country. Well, I think one of them was Wakefield or something like that, and they had a really quite vicious policy about it because they were getting bombarded. The other thing was things like the fact is that if you put, for example, stickers on bus shelters, that's actually a criminal offence because it's vandalism. And it's a question of if somebody does that and you work out who it was, you theoretically are supposed to plot to go in and have a bit of a blow with them. So it's really quite a large subject actually. It really is. Everything from pavement painting to all sorts of things. Signs put up inappropriately. And then you have all the whole business about whether a sign is offensive. There's a whole raft of stuff about, is this racist, is this racist, is it sexist, is it... You get, well, you go through all the isms. But I mean, all I can say is I'd be quite happy to try and return to this and maybe come back with some kind of sort of...
It might be just out of, this is your observations are spot on as usual. I mean, my only comment would be, this is dated 2006.
Yeah.
This is 2007.
Well, I told you
They
it
might
was
well
well ago.
be, they might
Oh, no, I just found it out of my repository.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I get that. But, it could be that if we look at it, perhaps look at this thing slightly differently. If people are putting, it might be minor, and it might be unenforceable for us, but it could be a revenue stream at some point if people want to advertise on our land, if you see what I mean.
Our big problem with that is that we don't have any control really over our highways. The highways includes payment.
No, exactly. I mean, it's just a point. If people are, I was just thinking more. You're thinking originally about the football.
Well, I mean, it was the football club who came forward, and of course we're also familiar with the fact that on the sort of the corner there, you often get banners that are
Yeah.
displayed for periods of time. You also get a banner that's often on the junction of New Road and St Peter's Road there by the pumping station in the corner. People hang things up there. Now these kind of unofficial advertising posts are almost certainly breaching all the regulations, both in terms of their impact on highways and probably within the sort of the ENC area of it as well. But I do think that it may be worth our while trying to pull something together so that we could then say with a degree of confidence to businesses in the town, if you want some guidance about what the rules are and what the town council's policy on these things are, please come to us. But that will mean revisiting some of the work that we've already done.
I appreciate that. I mean, I brought these along because I got them. We had an issue, for example, that one of the pubs decided they would drill holes in a Grade 2 listed building.
In the Market
In
Square.
order to put the thing on and whatever else. And, I mean, if you recall, our erstwhile greengrocer, who's not been here for a long while now, had his thing up there been here for 50 years or something like that, and that was stuck up there. And I mean, I had to go around and politely ask him to take it down. I said, that's been up there for about 4.5 years now. And the time has passed, and you're defacing, a Grade 2 listed building. It really does get quite. Anyway.
Can I suggest that we try and look at that as soon as we can, and then bring it back onto an agenda item. We also, of course, have our own planning policy document, which we said when we finally sorted out the neighbourhood plan with its design elements, we ought to think in terms of revisiting that. So I fear to say that I think that's going to be something else we're going to want to look at.
Yeah, it makes sense to link it all together, doesn't it?
Try and sort of link it all together, work it on it for the first part of the year. I'm sort of conscious of the fact that there'll be elections next year, and it would be nice if the oncoming council has kind of ready-made package of stuff in this area from us. So if we can keep those two things in mind, we might want to start putting them on the agenda as a sort of regular thing to discuss and update. That brings us to any other relevant matters for report, I think. No. Is there anything that you think we should have mentioned that we've forgotten?
No, I don't think so.
In which case, tonight I'll call the meeting closed. Too bad.
I mean, this is now off record, of course.